Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Haunting of Hollow Eyes Inn. The ferry to the Isle of Wight cut through the fog like a knife. Holly Arnold stood at the rail, watching the shoreline fade in and out of view, wondering what had driven her to accept this trip. Maybe it was the escape she needed. After her recent breakup, anything to get away from the familiar felt like freedom. The email had arrived 2 weeks ago, an offer too good to pass up 2 nights at the historic Hollow Eyes Inn for a fraction of its usual price. The inn, nestled on the island's northern cliffs, was the kind of place people only spoke about in whispers. Its reputation as a coast landmark had been woven into local lore for generations, but Holly had always dismissed it as mere superstition. Now, as she approached, the shadows on the horizon seemed to beckon her forward. Holly arrived just before dusk. The inn stood solemnly atop the cliffs, its dark stone walls pockmarked with centuries of weathering. The windows, clouded with age, reflected nothing of the surrounding landscape, almost as if they were blind. A rusted sign swung on iron chains overhead, Hollow Eyes Inn. As she stepped inside, the smell of old wood and damp stone enveloped her. A stooped figure in a dark suit appeared behind the reception desk, moving with the quiet shuffle of someone who had become a fixture of the place itself. "M.S. Arnold, I presume?" His voice was gravelly, with an accent that clung to the island's history. "That's right, Holly Arnold," she confirmed, offering a polite smile. The man handed her a tarnished key, which looked as though it had been around since the inn's construction. "Room 3, mind the mirrors." Holly blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly, but before she could ask what he meant, the man disappeared into the back room, leaving her alone in the dimly lit foyer. She climbed the narrow staircase, the creak of the old wood echoing ominously in the silence. Room 3 was at the far end of the hallway, its door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, Holly stepped into a room that felt frozen in time. The wallpaper, a faded floral pattern, curled at the edges, and the air was thick with the smell of dust and neglect. The first thing she noticed was the large, oval mirror hanging on the far wall, directly across from the bed. Its surface gleamed, oddly pristine compared to the rest of the room, as if it had been cleaned recently, almost obsessively. Holly sat on the bed, feeling the weight of the room settle around her. She shivered, blaming it on the cold, and unpacked her suitcase, determined to make the best of her stay. After all, it was just 2 nights. She could handle that. The first night passed uneventfully. Though Holly's sleep was restless, she dreamed of a figure standing at the foot of her bed, its face obscured by shadows. She could feel its gaze, cold and unblinking. But when she awoke, the room was empty. The mirror, however, seemed different. The glass shimmered faintly, as if it were alive. Dismissing it as the lingering effects of her dream, Holly decided to explore the inn the next morning. She roamed its labyrinthine halls, discovering long-abandoned rooms and forgotten corridors. The staff was nowhere to be found, except for the same old man she had met at reception, who now stared blankly out of a window, unresponsive to her questions. That night, as she lay in bed, the strange sense of being watched returned, more intense than before. Holly tried to ignore it, pulling the covers up to her chin, but when she glanced at the mirror, her blood ran cold. There was something in the reflection. She sat up, heart pounding, and stared at the glass. At first, it seemed normal, just her own image looking back at her, but then she saw something moving in the background, a shadow, no, a figure. Holly's breath caught in her throat as the reflection of the room behind her darkened. The figure was there again, standing in the corner, closer than it had been in her dream. She whipped her head around, expecting to see someone in the room with her, but there was no one. The reflection told a different story. Her eyes snapped back to the mirror, and the figure stepped forward. Its face was gone, its eyes hollow and deep, like bottomless pits. A cold whisper filled the room, too quiet to understand, but it sent chills down her spine. She scrambled out of bed, backing away from the mirror. The door to her room was stuck. She yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Behind her, the whispering grew louder. It was a voice, hollow and distant, echoing through her skull. With a final, desperate pull, the door flew open. Holly tumbled into the hallway. Gasping for breath, she glanced back at the room. The figure was gone. The mirror was just a mirror. Terrified and disoriented, she ran down the hall, pounding on the doors of the other rooms, but when they opened, they were all empty. The inn was deserted. Panic clawed at her mind as she bolted down the stairs, searching for the old man. He was waiting for her in the foyer, standing perfectly still, his back to her. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, without turning around. "So what? What the hell is happening here?" Holly demanded, her voice trembling. He turned, his hollow eyes locking onto hers. This place, the mirrors. They show you what you fear most. But it's not just a reflection. Once you see it, it sees you. Holly backed away, shaking her head. I'm leaving. I don't care what you say, I'm getting out of here. The old man's expression didn't change. You can't leave. Not now. Once it's seen you, it follows you. You'll never escape it. Ignoring him, Holly fled out the door and into the night, sprinting toward her car. But as she reached the cliffside road, the fog rolled in thick, swallowing the landscape whole. The island seemed to shift around her, as if it were alive, rearranging itself to trap her. Her heart raced, panic driving her forward. She stumbled through the fog, her breath coming in ragged gasps, when she saw it standing in the mist ahead. The figure. It was waiting for her, its hollow eyes gleaming through the haze. Holly screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the night. She turned to run, but no matter which direction she went, the figure was always there, closer and closer. Finally, exhausted and defeated, she collapsed to the ground. The figure stood over her, its cold, skeletal hand reaching out. As its fingers brushed her skin, the world around her dissolved into darkness, and the last thing Holly saw was her reflection in the figure's hollow, empty eyes, her own face, twisted in terror. She had become part of the inn now. Another soul trapped in its mirrors, waiting for the next traveler to seek refuge in Hollow Eyes Inn. The morning sun broke through the fog, casting long shadows over the cliffs. The old man stood at the inn's entrance, watching the ferry leave the dock. Another guest would arrive soon. He knew they always did. And the mirrors would be waiting. Days passed at the Hollow Eyes Inn, each one a mirror of the last. Time seemed to stretch, bending under the weight of its eternal gloom. The old man, whose name no one ever asked, continued his silent duties, dusting forgotten furniture, lighting the old lamps as dusk fell, and keeping a watchful eye on the mirrors. But something had changed since Holly Arnold disappeared. The mirrors whispered now, louder than ever. Shadows flickered behind the glass, and every so often a pale, familiar face would peer back, a face once filled with hope and defiance, now contorted in silent agony. Holly was still here. Her consciousness drifted in the space between reflections, trapped between layers of glass, her screams unheard. The inn had consumed her, just as it had countless others. She saw them, too, the souls of those who had come before, wandering aimlessly through a maze of endless corridors and mirrored walls that never led to freedom. Holly didn't know how long she had been trapped. Time was meaningless now, an endless cycle of fear and darkness. Every attempt to escape brought her back to the same place, facing her reflection, only it wasn't her reflection anymore. The figure with hollow eyes had merged with her. Its cold prisons coiled around her mind, feeding off her terror, growing stronger with each passing moment. Some nights, Holly's image would flicker to life in the mirror of room 3, her hollow eyes staring out at whoever was unlucky enough to stay in the room. She could feel their fear as they gazed into the glass, unaware that they were seeing not just a reflection, but a warning. One rainy evening, a new group of travelers arrived at the inn, 3 friends on a hiking trip. They laughed as they entered, their voices echoing through the empty halls, oblivious to the weight of the shadows clinging to the walls. The old man greeted them as usual, his hollow gaze flicking briefly to the mirrors, as if assessing how long it would take for the inn to devour them. The group was assigned to separate rooms 2, 3, and 4. Holly's heart sank when she saw one of them, Sarah, a young woman with short brown hair, enter room 3. The door closed, and Holly felt the familiar pull of the mirror, dragging her consciousness back to the surface. Sarah unpacked her belongings, humming to herself. She glanced at the mirror occasionally, admiring her reflection, unaware of the shadow lurking just beneath the surface. Holly wanted to warn her, to scream, to make her understand what was coming. But all she could do was watch. That night, Sarah tossed and turned in bed, her sleep disturbed by vivid nightmares. Holly hovered behind the mirror, her reflection flickering in and out of view, desperate to break free. Sarah awoke with a start, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She glanced at the mirror, and for a moment she saw something, an unfamiliar figure in the reflection. Holly's face. Sarah's eyes widened in confusion, then fear, as Holly's reflection twisted, her hollow eyes staring back with a cold, hungry intensity. The figure stepped forward, moving closer in the reflection. Sarah scrambled out of bed, backing away from the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. The door to the room wouldn't open, just as it hadn't for Holly. The old man's words echoed in her mind, though she hadn't heard them herself. Once it's seen you, it follows you. Sarah's reflection changed, her own face morphing into something grotesque, a twisted version of herself with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth that seemed to scream, though no sound came out. The mirror rippled like water, and Holly felt herself being pulled back into the depths. She clawed at the surface, trying to break through, but the inn's curse was too strong. She was trapped, forever bound to this place, a prisoner in the glass. Sarah, trembling, finally wrenched the door open and fled down the hallway, her mind spinning with terror. She found her friends, waking them with desperate cries, her words a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. The group packed their bags in a frenzy, too frightened to stay another night. As they drove away from the inn, Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. But there, just beneath her reflection, she saw it again, Holly's face. And behind Holly, the figure with hollow eyes, watching, always watching. The hollow eyes had claimed another victim, and the cycle would continue. Each traveler who passed through would see their darkest fears, their souls trapped in the mirrors, feeding the ancient curse that bound them all. And deep within the glass, Holly Arnold waited. She waited for the day someone would finally break the curse. But with each passing year, her hope faded, replaced by the cold, empty eyes of the figure that now owned her soul. The ferry to the Isle of Wight continued to carry new visitors, each one unaware of the horrors that awaited them. And at the Hollow Eyes Inn, the mirrors remained silent sentinels, hiding the truth of what they reflected. For those who looked too closely would see not just their darkest fears, but the fate that awaited them. And once they saw it, there was no escape. The ferry docked again, and the old man at the Hollow Eyes Inn stood by the window, watching. A new guest approached, luggage in hand, walking straight toward the inn. The mirrors stirred, scenting fresh prey. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.